to go over quickly that there's two types of special right triangles. We did the 45, 45, 90 last Thursday. Yeah, those are easy. Remember, on a 45, 45, they may just mark that these two angles are congruent. They may just mark the sides are congruent, or they will actually put in that it's a 45. But you need to recognize that they're 45s. So a 45, 45 always has two equal legs and a hypotenuse. So you'll always have one thing given to you. If you're given the leg, the hypotenuse is just equal to whatever that leg is times the square root of 2. If you're given the the hypotenuse, the leg is going to equal half of the hypotenuse times the square root of 2. Okay? Now, these rules, they're easy if you remember them. You really don't need them though. You could use the Pythagorean theorem if you forgot these rules. But it's just so much quicker if you remember them.
Wait, so if you're given the leg and it says 45 degrees, like in between the leg and the hypotenuse, it says 45 degrees, and then the leg says 4.
The leg is 4?
The bottom.
That means this leg is 4 and that's 4 square roots of 2. The legs are always going to be equal. And the hypotenuse is always whatever the leg is times the square root of 2. So, today we're doing the 30, 60, 90s.
30, 60, 90, 36. I bet you they're double each time.
You're kind of close. On a 30, 60, 90, they're not quite as easy to remember. But there are two legs. But obviously one of them's shorter than the other. There's a short leg and there's a long leg. And then there's the hypotenuse. Now, before we get started, on the 45, 45, 90s, the square root of 2 is used. Leg times the square root of 2, half the hypotenuse times the square root of 2. On a 30, 60, 90, it's kind of the same rules, except they don't use, it's not square root of 2, it's square root of 3.
Oh, okay.
Okay? So you got to remember the difference between these two.
Okay.
Now, one of three things is going to happen
Okay.
on a 30, 60, 90. They'll always give you one of the angles, sometimes both, but you just need to recognize if it's a 30, 60, 90. They're either going to give you the short leg, the hypotenuse, or the long leg. Okay? One of those three things. So, if you had to guess, there's two of them that are easy to compare.
6, 8, and 10, right?
No, that's 6, 8, 10 is a right triangle, but it's not a 30, 60, 90.
Okay. 6, 8, 12.
The hypotenuse is always just going to be twice as long as the short leg.
Oh, goodness. I told you 6, 8, 12. And then the other one's like.
So, this is going to be 12.
So then that one would be 9.
So then, if they give you the hypotenuse, then
That's 5.
the short leg is half the hypotenuse.
And the other one's.
They just work together. If you know this, you know this. If you know that, you know that.
You just have to do the other one.
Okay?
I have to do that.
Now you could do the Pythagorean theorem if you wanted to. So if you remembered that rule, that would help you, except on this triangle. This is the one where you have to know the rule, or else you won't be able to solve it.
Okay.
But now here's the one that's a little harder to remember. To find the long leg, it's not that tough, no. It's the long leg is just the short leg times the square root of 3. It's similar to this one.
So it's just 6.
So this is just 6 square roots of 3. This is 5 square roots of 3. So these are the two easy types of triangles. If you know either the hypotenuse or the short leg. If this is 20, that's 10 square roots of 3. Okay? Now, when you know the long leg, that's when it's a little trickier. And it's similar to that one right there. If you know the long leg, you got to find the short leg first. The short leg is the long leg times the square root of 3 divided by 3. It's really the same as this except with 3 instead of 2. Because this is the hypotenuse times the square root of 2 divided by 2. The long leg times the square root of 3 divided by 3. So, since this is 12, this would be 12 square roots of 3 divided by 3.
Could you just write that or you have to figure it out?
You could leave it like that, but sometimes they simplify, sometimes they don't. This one does, because what is 12 over 3?
4.
So that's 4 square roots of 3. And then how does the hypotenuse compare to the short side?
Double.
It's doubled. So you double 4 square roots of 3 is just 8 square roots of 3. Okay? Now, they don't always simplify like this. The only time you can reduce it is if this number is a multiple of 3. So if you have one like this, say the long leg is 10. Again, you got to use this formula. You got to find the short leg first. It's the long leg times the square root of 3 divided by 3. And you can't do anything more. You just got to leave it like that. So then, sometimes people get this wrong. Hey, when you double that to get the hypotenuse,
10 square roots of 3 divided by 3.
you got to double it.
20.
20 square roots of 3 over 3. Because when you take this times 2, you're taking it times 2 over 1. Top times top is 20 square roots of 3. So remember, when you've got square roots, you got to treat it just like it's a variable. You can't go 10 times 3 because that's a square root. The only numbers you can multiply that are common are the regular numbers.
The regular, yeah. Another one. Another one. Another one. DJ Khaled. Another. Connor's gonna be a math teacher, just like Henderson. I can see it. Watch this. Connor's gonna show the ways of his wisdom. Connor loves this man.
Okay. So, like I said, there's only 3 different things that'll happen. You'll either be given the short leg, the long leg, or the hypotenuse. So if it's the short leg, the first thing you got to remember, the main thing you should remember, because then you're guaranteed to get a lot of points right, is the short leg and the hypotenuse just double. So since this is 7, the hypotenuse is 14. Then the long leg is the short leg times the square root of 3. That's all there is to it.
Easy money.
So, when it's the long leg, these are the most difficult ones. Just because you got to remember, this is a little harder to remember for some reason. If you know the long leg, the short leg is whatever that long leg is, times the square root of 3, divided by 3. Simplify it if you can, but 4 over 3 won't reduce, so you just leave it like that. And then how does the hypotenuse compare to the long leg or short leg? Double it. So all you double is that top number right there.
8 square roots of 8.
That's it.
That's the answer.
Yep, that's the answer. So The hypotenuse is 7, so how long would the short leg be? 3.5. Now, just so you realize this, if you look at an example or look up an answer, they'll write it as 7/2. You can leave it 7/2, which is 3.5. Either way you want to write it is fine. I always write it this way, but. So then, the long leg is just the short leg times the square root of 3. Nope. Remember, you divide by 3 when you're going from the long to the short. So in the book, they wouldn't write it 3.5, they would write it 7 square roots of 3 divided by 2, which is 7 over 2 is 3.5. So either way is fine. So here when we have the long leg, the short leg is that long leg times the square root of 3 divided by 3.
So it'd be 42 square root of 3.
Yep. But you can simplify this one.
So it'd be 7
Right.
square root of 3.
7 square roots of 3, which means this is 14 square roots of 3. Short leg, hypotenuse doubles. The long leg is the short leg times the square root of 3. Long leg, these are the tougher ones. Then you got to do this bottom one. You take the long leg, square roots of 3 divided by 3. Will that reduce?
No.
So you just leave it like that,
16 square roots.
and then it's 16 square roots of 3 over 3. Okay?
Is that it?
That's it.
So that's easier.
Yep.